Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Amanda and in today's video we have a Sims 4 speed build, and this was another build that was for my Renovating Willow Creek playlist. So if you missed that previous, I think I've done 2 videos for it, so if you missed those previous videos, basically I've been going through and renovating Willow Creek kind of for my own gameplay. This is one of the worlds that I tend to play in a lot more, and I kind of wanted to go around, renovate a lot of the houses and create some of my own families to put in there, so that when I'm playing a legacy challenge that I have in mind, it feels a little bit more immersive. I kind of just get that vibe when I'm playing, that I want to have the world to feel a little bit more my own. Now, one of the things about this is I wanted to change a lot of the builds, renovate the EA ones and build lots on the empty lots, but I still wanted it to have a bit of a Willow Creek vibe to it. So I wanted a lot of my landscaping to match the landscaping that's already there for that world, and kind of the same for the houses. I did want them to have a little bit more of a modern look to them compared to what the EA builds look like. So that's kind of the vibe that I've gone for a lot of the builds for this particular, I'm not going to say save file because I don't plan on it being a save file, kind of just for my own gameplay, but I'll say for this particular playlist, as I have been doing all of these particular builds as YouTube videos, so I have created it as a playlist on here. So let's talk this build. Now, I found this house on Pinterest. So this was like a real life house, and it had the house and the floor plan. And I don't usually build from a real life floor plan because I find it quite tricky to translate into The Sims, but I thought I would give it a go in this video. So the outside of it was the roofing, for example. I really didn't feel 100% with this, but it was kind of one of those roofs that I've replicated it as best as I can, but it just didn't look 100% right for The Sims. So some of the bump outs here, they're not on the actual picture I had, although I've included them in the build, just because I feel as though if you have the side of a house with nothing going on it in a Sims build, it just looks a bit awkward. So I added a few extra bump outs that weren't necessarily there, but generally the floor plan I had copied, so it was a little different, and I did really enjoy doing it. I quite liked how the shell of the house turned out in the end. It was just the roofing that I wasn't 100% on. In the picture for this build, it was painted a lovely light pastel green shade, but I'd done a green build recently, so I decided to change that up and go for this blue and grey theme. And I wanted this house to feel as though it had quite a lot of character, so I wanted to make sure that I didn't want to have it all one colour or be too matchy, so I went with the blue and the grey, and I quite liked how it turned out. It kind of did give off a bit of a coastal vibe at first, but once I come in and did a lot of the landscaping, we moved away from that look a little bit, but it did give me the idea to do a kind of coastal looking property, and I think that could look quite nice. Unfortunately, the only beachy world we have in The Sims 4 is Solani, and I wouldn't say that felt coastal as such, not how I think of a UK coastal town anyway, but I still might give the build a go. Now, I did use a lot of base game for the exterior in this build because I felt as though those windows worked the nicest for a Willow Creek build, and that's kind of thing where I'm trying to get this to fit in with a lot of the Willow Creek outside. I did find that I used a lot more base game for that kind of stuff. Now, I did go around, place down the windows as best as I could. I do always end up tweaking things like windows and doors when it comes to doing the interior of a property, but I just kind of got them roughly placed. Something I noticed a lot about the exteriors in the Willow Creek builds are that they have fenced off back gardens, and I suppose that's because the world it feels quite busy, like you'd have lots of people just walking around. So I went for that same look for this particular build and fenced off the back garden, but I used quite an open looking fence. So as you can see, this kind of got like a trellis vibe to it, because I always find it's only a small back garden, And if I'd fenced it off with a solid fence, I feel as though it'd look quite enclosed when you are playing. So I went for this fence. It's not one that I use quite often, and it didn't fully match the look for the front of the property, but I quite liked it. And I kind of just felt as though maybe they used to have a solid fence, but they changed it out for this one. You could maybe come in and put some hedges all along either the inside or the outside of it if you wanted it to look a little bit more private, but I kind of just left it like it was, and I quite liked how it turned out. So before we jump on to the inside, I did want to come in and finish off the landscaping for the front and kind of like this side part of the house. I really liked how this worked out, having this side gate here, and then I popped the outdoor bin there as well rather than having it at the front of the house, because I kind of just thought that that looked quite nice when it comes to curb appeal, that the front of the house stays really nice and looks quite manicured, and then you've got those other bits around to the side. And then where you've got that side fence from the back garden as well, I felt as though that worked because the kitchen area is off onto the back of the house as well, so that worked out well. If you were doing something like emptying the kitchen bin into the big bin, you've got easy access to it by having it there at the side. Now, another thing about this build that was in the floor plan and the house that I see online, I wish I'd kept the pictures and tried to insert them into the video, but it had this cutout kitchen, kind of like an open plan where you had this angled section here. This was a little bit tricky to translate into the Sims. We don't actually have counters that fit like that for a tight corner like this, so I did have to kind of merge some counters together to get this to look how I wanted it to, and it does mean that there's a little bit of clipping. Now you will actually see that I do grab a sim and play test this, because before I took this too far and kind of like finished the kitchen, I wanted to make sure this would actually work. Otherwise I thought, you know what, I'll just take it out and change it up. But I do bring a sim in a little while and test out whether it works, and it all worked perfectly. The only downside is that kind of like glitching and clipping that you'll see on the countertops. Talking of countertops, these are the newer counters from the base game update, and I am really loving them. I think they look really nice and modern, and I love the marble effect that they've gone for on the tops of them. So I'm really liking these. I loved this teal blue shade. A lot of the time I'll go for a more classic looking counter, so you know, like wood or something like that, but I really liked how this looked. So here I'm trying to cover up as best as I can that clipping with lots of clutter, so I did have to play around and kind of like use a few different items to see how well I could get this to work. So you will see that I do faff around with it quite a lot. I did cut out some of the footage of the faffing around, but I kept a lot of it in just to show you guys kind of like my thought process and how I got it to work for me in the end, which kind of ended up this way. So this was like the final look. I go in with a couple of shelves, one sized down, just to cover this tiny section in the corner that you could kind of see there was no cabinet there even with the clutter. So I popped those shelves down, and then you're not really going to see it anyway, but from certain angles it would annoy me if I knew that there was a gap, and I didn't want to have that other counter clipping right into the corner between the wall and the cooker. So I went for the wooden shelves, and like I said, you can't actually see them, but just from certain angles there was like a tiny gap, and those shelves cover that up. And then we've got all our clutter on there, and it worked perfectly. You see there, as I mentioned, I brought my sim in to play test that the cooker would still work with it how it was, and luckily it did, otherwise this would have been really annoying. But yeah, I really loved how this kitchen looked in the pictures of the build I had. I changed out a lot of the colors. Like I mentioned, that house was very heavy on the greens, and I went for a lot of blues. It was a real life house, which is quite cool, building a house from a real life picture, but like I mentioned, it can be a little bit tricky with things like roofing or angles like that where you're popping in the cooker. Hopefully one day there's more updates to build mode so we can work around those. Over on this side, I decided to pop in, I changed the windows around a little bit, and then I popped in that sink, and I really loved how this kind of looked out. I love doing the washing up and looking out my window as I'm doing it. So I quite liked that vibe over here. Although the windows aren't directly in front of the sink, I kind of just liked that vibe, and it let a lot of light into the kitchen. So over on this side, I cluttered up with some plants. Of course, we've got to add in the plate rack. I really love lots of these lived in items. They're not a necessity because they don't have any gameplay value, but it's really fun to have them in there to really make the build look like an actual lived in house. And when I'm building a lot of these family houses, I do like to have this fully lived in feel to them. So I like to use lots of clutter and lots of items that might not necessarily be for gameplay. Items like these, which they are for gameplay. So obviously we have the Laundry Day stuff pack, and this was more of a recent pack for me to purchase. I never used to have this, and I do build in the Sims more than I do the gameplay. So I can imagine that gameplay with Laundry Day or laundry can be a little bit annoying. I have heard other Simmers mention it, but I really love having the washer and dryer for a build. I feel like it adds so much realism. So I did decide to come in this build and turn this little space here into a utility room. In the original pictures of the build I see for this was actually a bathroom, but like I said, I thought it would be good as a utility room. Now, if you want to keep the look of the utility room, but you don't want to play with Laundry Day, there will just be a couple of laundry baskets to delete, and I believe that if you delete them, then there's not going to be take away that laundry gameplay. I believe it's not something I've tested. Again, I've just heard other Simmers mention it. So I did pop down just a laundry basket in that utility room and one in the parents' room as well, so that you just need to delete those if you didn't want to have that bit of the gameplay. Anyway, we've then moved on into the dining room space, and this house does have a very open plan feel to it, and I quite liked that. Although the kind of like the TV sofa area, I want to say living room, but because the whole space is quite open, we're just going to say like the TV area, that is quite small and narrow, because it's kind of in a way like the hallway, which yeah, like it was like that in the pictures I see. Maybe the particular house, maybe they're just not big TV watchers or sofa sitters, but that area was a little different, because usually the living space for me, I'll kind of focus that around the TV area, but maybe that house, they're just not big TV watchers. So that part of the living space felt quite small to me, but I did quite like how it still turned out. I loved that there was this large dining table area. Now, there are 4 Sims. This house is for 4 Sims. It's for 2 parents and 2 children. So I did add in an additional 2 dining chairs, because I kind of pictured when you have people like grandparents over or family and friends, it was nicer to have that larger dining space. Now we're going to move on into that little living room nook sort of area. I did end up changing around the diagonal wall for the study to give the living room a bit more space, and that was something else I quite liked about doing a build based off of a real life picture, is you can come in and make it work for you. Obviously, if the challenge is to completely replicate the picture, then you wouldn't do that, but I felt as though having that diagonal wall with the door there completely made this living space feel even more smaller and cramped. So by bringing that out to a square, it kind of created a bigger nook for the sofa and armchair to go in, and then just give you a little bit more space in this area. So we're going to come in. I like to add in things like the gaming console, as I think it's fun for the teens to do, and I like to try and make sure that I include lots of activities in my build. So any little items like that do have either skill building or gameplay functionality, I try to add in as many of those as I can. So here we've got the TV and the gaming console. I love adding these headphones. I think they're from one of the clutter kits next to them as well, as it just gives off headset vibes if you're sitting there playing, say, Call of Duty as a teenager, or even as an adult, you've got your headset there. And then I did want to make sure I included things like a bookcase. I kind of as well, I had in mind for this build a teenager and a young child, so maybe a child that's just left toddler age. So I do add in a few toys in a moment in the living room. We add in a craft table, I believe, and a toy box, but I did jump first of all into decorating up the very small hallway area. Now there was kind of like two hallways, so you've got the hallway that opens up into the front door, which runs straight through to the back door, which I thought was quite nice, but then you also have this little hallway cutout that leads you into a small bathroom and the two children's rooms. Again, that's not something I've really ever done in a video before, sorry, a build before. So it's quite fun to follow a floor plan and add that in. It seemed a little bit pointless, but I liked the way it looked. But here, as I mentioned, is where I was coming in and adding in some of those toys, just so that there was a bit more stuff for the children to do that are not necessarily in their bedrooms. I know in real life, children's stuff just isn't confined to their bedrooms. It takes over a lot of your house. So I wanted to add in a little bit of that into this Sims house. I did pop down the craft table in the living room and then the toy box. And then when it comes to building the child's room, I completely forgot that we already have a crafts table in the living room. So I did end up adding another one into the bedroom. But moving on now into the parents' room, I really liked how this room turned out. I loved how this particular blue bedding looked with those brown tables. I thought it was a really nice color palette, so I kind of went with that for the rest of this room, kept it looking quite neutral, and then that blue bedding was kind of like the focal point of this room. I went for his and hers bedside tables, so I imagined maybe the mum likes listening to audiobooks in bed, so I sat the headphones down there and then a little notepad. I did kind of have the idea that maybe the mum wants to be a writer, so I did stick a few notebooks around. I think there's one in the kitchen, one in the study/games room, and the one there, because I imagine that maybe she's got a full-time job, but secretly, or not secretly, but it's her dream to be a writer. So I thought maybe they're listening to audiobooks, maybe that's of an evening she jots down ideas for a book, as it's something she would like to do in the future. When it comes to the parents of this house as well, I had lots of thoughts in mind for this family, but especially the parents. I wanted to imagine that they're maybe in their mid-30s, because I wanted to imagine that their older teenage daughter is pushing closer to going off to university age. But I wanted to imagine that they're in their 30s, but they're very young, 35-year-olds, if that makes sense. They like a lot of the modern, trendy stuff, and they're quite, I don't know how to word it, but down with the kids kind of vibe. I wanted to have that really young feel to them. So I do actually, the study that was for this house, I kind of ended up turning into his and her gamer rooms, but I wanted to make sure that throughout the rest of the house there was quite a modern, fresh vibe to it as well. So that was why I went for that look a lot throughout the build. I feel as though it's got lots of modern elements to it, which I haven't necessarily done in a lot of my Willow Creek builds. But like I said, when I was renovating these builds, I want them to suit my style of gameplay and the looks that I love. So I've been trying to make sure that I do that for these builds. Now, this bathroom, the ensuite for the parents' room, is actually bigger than the main bathroom, which was another thing I found quite strange about the floor plan for this house. Like, usually the main bathroom is the biggest bathroom and ensuites are quite small. But for this particular house that I was looking at, the ensuite was massive in comparison to the main bathroom. But I went with it. So we added in 2 sinks. As I'd imagine, it must be lovely to have his and her sections in the bathroom. And then I went for the shower from Discover University, I believe, but used those glass panels, I think they're from Snowy Escape, to section it off a little bit and make it feel like, to kind of make use of that space, because I'm used to building quite small bathrooms. So I kind of tried to add in a few things to make it feel more filled, but also keep it looking quite fresh and bright. Now we're going to jump into what was listed in the floor plan that I was following as the study. And in the build that I looked at for this one, it was a very classic looking study. It literally pretty much just had a desk, some bookcases and a sofa. I wanted to go away from that vibe and turn this into a his and hers gaming space. Now, if you don't want to follow this look, you could simply take out one of the desk setups and you'd have a pretty simple office. But I really had fun here going full on for that his and hers vibe. So obviously the mum side, we've got lots of pastel colors, some trees. Again, I popped some more books down there. I wanted to stick with that she'd like to be a writer inspiration sort of vibe there. Of course, there are ways to do that in The Sims as well. So perhaps if you're choosing to use this build for your own gameplay, you could actually do that for the mum's build. That's what I plan on doing when I create the family for this house. I want to make it so she's already got quite a successful full-time job, but on the side she's really trying to get into the writing career. So I also wanted to fill this space with some more skill building objects that could maybe be used by the teenager and the child. I usually always end up adding in the guitar if I go for anything music related, but I thought there was plenty of space in here to add in the keyboard as well. So perhaps the younger child daughter, perhaps the parents are pushing her to get into music, so they've set up this little space in their study so she can come in and practice keyboard. Now, I haven't played The Sims gameplay very much in a long time. I do much prefer building, so I hope that the child Sims can use the keyboard, but if not, it's there as an option. And then I'm just coming in now before we jump on to doing their rooms and just doing their bathroom. And I kept this bathroom a very simple, kind of just pulled out some similar items from the previous bathroom, and it was only a small space. And then we are going to move on into the younger daughter's room. So as I mentioned when I was doing the living room, I wanted this daughter, I kind of pictured her as she's a child in The Sims, but perhaps just gone out of the toddler age range. So I wanted it to still feel a very young, colourful room. Now, I haven't ever done this colour theme for a child's bedroom before, so I wanted to try and use some items that I haven't used often. So I feel as though I use a few items here that are from the Growing Together pack and the High School Years pack. I only very recently purchased these two, so I'm not massively familiar with the items, but I was trying to get them to work with some other items in the build. And I wanted to have it a mix of, like, you've still got some of those little younger toddlery age items around. So things like the cuddly toys, little bits and bobs like that. And then the whole little play setup thing from the little campers kit. I feel as though this looks quite young as well, and I really loved this wallpaper and rug. I love that they're matching. I feel as though it's not something you're necessarily going to get too much of in real life, like a rug that fully matches the pattern of wallpaper. So I thought that was really, really cute. I did also add in just a few other toys and another craft table there as well. I do remember from a while ago when I was playing The Sims that toddlers couldn't use the craft table. I'm not sure if that's changed, but I think that's a real shame because they definitely look as though they're aimed more at younger children in The Sims. But yeah, I just thought I'd go with that. I then also added in, I remembered at that point of the build that I hadn't added in any radiators. So I quickly went through the rooms I had finished and added in radiators. Again, I love these items. I think it's a shame that they're locked behind the for rent pack because they do feel like light switches. They should have been included in a base game because they're just such a necessity to make a realistic looking build. So I added them into the rooms I'd already done, and then here we're moving on to the older teenage daughter's room. And I did want this room to have a little bit more of a grown-up feel. I kind of pictured it would maybe be for a teenager in kind of like the 15-16-year-old bracket. I wanted to stick with quite a pink girly theme for it though, with kind of like some little boho elements. Now I did use kind of like halfway through doing this build, I purchased the Growing Together and high school years pack. So I do believe I used a few items from that pack. I'm not 100% familiar with all the items for that pack at the moment because it's quite new to me, but I did love I've wanted it for a little while, so I finally got around to downloading them, especially the high school years pack. So I wanted in this room to be a bit of a study space, and I wanted it to look quite cutesy. Obviously we have already got space for 2 gamer parents, but I kind of pictured this more as a space for the teenager to study. So I set up a little desk area, and then I kind of imagined she's quite a girly girl. That's why the rooms are very pink. So I made sure to add in lots of clutter for things like makeup, clothes. I loved this little floor item with all the clutter bits just mixed together on the floor. I liked how messy it looked. Obviously you could recreate this using random bits of clutter yourself, but I loved the items that were there, and it just kind of worked for a teenager's room especially. So I kind of tried to add in some of that, and I wanted to bring in some more, maybe a few more grown-up items like the gym mat and the makeup brushes. So I popped them down too. I kept this room fairly simple though. It's quite quick and easy to do. And then that was the final room in this house to build. So I come outside again, and I just finished off a little bit of landscaping on the front of the build, and then we moved over to the back garden because I hadn't really done anything to that. I did decide to add in a bike here. I kind of pictured the dad being a little bit on the eco-friendly side, so maybe he prefers to cycle to work rather than drive, even though we don't yet have cars in The Sims 4. So I thought it was cool to add that in. And yeah, obviously anyone in the household can use it, but I pictured it was the dad's transport to work. Coming out into the back garden, it was only a very small space. Obviously I could have built this on a bit of a bigger lot, and then I would have had a bigger back garden space, but I kind of just felt as though maybe they're not very outdoorsy people, so they just use the garden for the kids maybe playing it, and then for the odd barbecue. So I popped down the stand-in planter thing from Eco Lifestyle, I believe, and a planter pot, but I imagined maybe the parents have just let the garden be more for the kids. So I popped down the swing set because we had already done quite a nice bit of landscaping in the front of the house, and that all looked quite manicured. So I imagined maybe the garden is just kind of just somewhere to chill and play in. Lastly, I come in and added in the terrain paint, just because I always like to do this last because of that bug that was around for a while where when you saved and left the game, all your terrain paint would go. So I always tend to do this last, but I feel as though it just again adds in that touch of realism. And then that, guys, brings us pretty much towards the end of the build. So I just want to thank you all for watching. I have left a little clip of the finished look as well as some screenshots, and as I mentioned, this build is already available to download on the Sims 4 gallery. All the details are below. So yeah, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Bye bye.